Hi all, and welcome to Chess News number 45. We're halfway the mark at the US Chess Championships 2014 in St. Louis, Missouri. A lot of exciting stuff has happened, and I've decided to take a look at a number of game fragments from the first few rounds. I want to take you through 8 battles, 4 from the open section and 4 from the women's section. So get a coffee, sit back and enjoy! The first game fragment is taken from the first round of the open section, and it's Ray Robson playing with the white pieces against Sergei Ehrenberg with the black pieces. It's black to move. Now if we take a look at the position, we can see that black is a pawn up. But in these typical middle game positions with heavy pieces, that's normally not the most important thing to look at. More important is the activity of the heavy pieces and also the safety of the king positions. So let's compare the king positions. If we start with white's king, we can see that he is sitting quite nicely and safely here on the b1 square, protected by this pawn shield on a2, b2 and c2. Yes, it's true. He has a temporary back rank weakness that black could try to exploit, but if white is careful about that, he has a very sound and safe king position. Black's king, on the other hand, also seems to be sitting here quite nicely and also protected by a pawn shield on a7, b7 and c6. But it is exactly this pawn on c6 that during the middle game moved from c7 that turns out to be the decisive factor here in this game. Okay, now this is a very important point to stress. Normally, when we have castled queenside and we move our c-pawns, as in this case, we weaken our position in 2 ways. First of all, we obviously weaken the diagonal, in this case the long diagonal from b8 to h2, but also, more importantly, the 7th rank. Now the same holds true if we move our f pawns in case of kingside castling. In that case we also move the so-called Italian diagonals, so the ones in black's case from a2 to g8, or in white's case from a7 to g1, and also the 2nd or the 7th ranks. So this small pawn move c7 c6 is a very important point to note, because had the pawn still be on c7, then obviously it would have been a blockader on the long diagonal, but also on the 7th rank. Okay, now all is not lost yet. Had Sergei Ehrenberg made use of the fact that white temporarily has a weakness on his back rank, and he could have played rook e6, trying to do 2 things at the same time. First of all, defending against the possible future rook e7, when everything would be completely over, and also obviously trying to make use of the back rank weakness in white's camp. So this would have been a very nice maneuver to try and neutralize the activity of the white rooks, using the fact that obviously white can now not take on e6, because then queen h1 would lead to checkmate. However, in some time trouble, Ehrenberg didn't play this, but instead he offered a queen trade with queen g5. But this was the losing move, and now Robson sets in the final assault. He starts with queen b4, threatening mate on b7. Now, there are some things that black can try to prevent the mate. Let's take a look at some of them. Rook c8 was a possibility, but obviously then after rook e8 that's not going to help. Also b5 was possible, but then after queen a3 he's experiencing similar difficulties as in the game. So in the game, after queen b4, he played b6. And now Robson played another very strong move. He played here a2, a4, solving the weakness of his back rank. And that's very important, because he wants to have his hands free as soon as he plays rook e to e7. Now, you could maybe argue that the immediate rook e to e7 was also possible, but then after queen g1 check, the rook would have to return, and then obviously queen g5 would lead to a repetition of the moves. So in this position, Robson again could play a4, but why not play a4 immediately, right? So this frees up his own back rank, and now he threatens the decisive incursion of his rook on e7. Obviously rook e6 is now no longer possible, because white would simply take that rook, and queen g1 check is no longer made, because the white king would escape to a2. Note that white is moving his a pawn instead of his c pawn. The c pawn could lead to similar weaknesses as we have discussed when we started looking at this position. Okay, after a4, Ehrenberg played c5, attacking the white queen, but the white queen just simply moved up and now is also threatening to come in via a6 and threaten mate on a7. Ehrenberg still tried rook g to c6, but nothing can help him anymore in this position, because his 7th rank is wide open. There is already one white rook on that 7th rank, and the second one is also threatening to go there. But white can even play stronger. He simply played queen a6, threatening mate on a7, and now all that you can do really is interpose one of the rooks. If black would have played rook 8 to c7, then obviously rook e1 to e8 check would mean curtains. So in the game, Ehrenberg rather played rook 6 to c7, but now there was a very simple and forced trade-off. It started with rook takes c7. Obviously, after rook takes c7, again the aforementioned rook e8 would be curtains. So in the game, Ehrenberg played king takes c7, and then here was the first fruit that Robson could reap from his positional play. Queen takes a7 check, but obviously the king hunt continues as well. King d6 was played, and after queen takes b6, white is even up a pawn, and after king d7 and rook d1 check, Ehrenberg resigned because of either king e8, when queen e6 picks up the rook on c7, if not more, or after king e7, queen b7 picks up the pawn. So I thought that was a very nice and instructive game fragment, showing you what a weakness of the 7th rank can do to you, especially if your opponent can put his rooks on the 7th rank. Okay, so let's continue to the next game fragment. This fragment is taken from the 3rd round, from the game between Alejandro Ramirez with white against Alexander Lenderman with black. Now, Lenderman has been running away with the tournament in the first half, and he is currently leading halfway together with Varushan Akobian. If I'm correct, they both have 4 points out of 6 games. And what Lenderman did in this game with the black pieces was especially instructive and impressive. In this game, it is he with black to move, and well, he played here the very surprising, I would say, h6. It is as if he wants to say to white, I want to castle on the next move, but I don't want you to play bishop e7 or excuse me, bishop g5 in that case. Now, I'm not so sure if that's such a big deal, because he could have castled in this position. Then after bishop g5, he could simply have retreated his bishop to e7 and have a fine, solid and safe, but also somewhat passive position. And obviously Lenderman had completely different things in mind, and the game takes a very interesting turn very soon. So if we go back to the beginning position, here he played h6. But Ramirez said, well, okay, big deal, you're leaving your king in the center, and don't forget that your e-pawn is pinned, so I will try to make use of that and play knight f5. Now I'm hitting your g7 pawn, and dear Lenderman, if now you want to castle, you seriously have to reckon with this destruction sacrifice of knight takes h6 check, and I'm not sure if you're going to survive that. If the position is equal at all, you will probably find it very difficult to defend against this kind of assault. But apparently that was not Lenderman's intention at all. Here he didn't castle, but he played the surprising king f8 instead, unpinning the pawn on e6, protecting the pawn on g7, and obviously now threatening to take that pesky knight on f5. Now, even for top-level grandmasters such as Alejandro Ramirez, these things can be very confusing. The funny thing is that had he now retreated with his knight to d4, he would have had a fine position in which black has lost his right to castle, and it's not so clear how black is going to untangle. Obviously, maybe he can play moves such as b5 and bishop b7, but still his rooks will not be connected for quite some time. His king is semi in the center, and I think that white is enjoying a certain advantage here. But the knight just came from d4, and obviously Ramirez didn't want to retreat the knight to d4, even though he got some interest for this move, yeah, because he made black's king move to f8. No, instead in the game he went to g3, and I guess he never could have expected what hit him now, because now, with the knight sitting somewhat vulnerably on g3, Lenderman now played the excellent h5. Isn't that funny? He started out with h7, h6, then he played the somewhat strange-looking king e8 to f8, and now he moves his h-pawn again. But he only moves his h-pawn when the knight is a sitting target on g3. Obviously he wants to win a tempo with h4, kicking the knight, opening up this diagonal, and he also intends now to bring his knight to g4, from where this knight is very seriously pressuring white's kingside. So understandably, after this move, Ramirez went into a very long think and finally played the best move. He played here knight to e4. Okay, now this is a good multi-purpose move because it sidesteps the attack with h4. It attacks both the bishop on c5 and the knight on f6, which in themselves are dangerous attackers, and also threatens to exchange one of them. Now let's take a look at some other options that he had at his disposal and try and figure out why this is the best move, this knight e4, and why he also went into a very long think, because there were some choices that could have turned out completely differently for him. For instance, after h5, had he gone bishop e3, which looks like a natural developing move, also countering the activity of the bishop on c5, then black could play bishop takes e3, and now not queen takes e3 to keep your pawn position intact, because the queen was defending the bishop on c4, and after queen takes c4, black would be up a piece. So after bishop takes e3, white would be forced to recapture with the f-pawn, but then After d7, bishop d7, preparing to bring the bishop to the long diagonal, black has already a distinct advantage. This, of course, has to do with the fact that now white's pawn position is not so very nice. This also is still not a very good knight. This bishop is still loose, and black can continue and try to develop his initiative here. So bishop e3 was already not a very attractive move to play, even though it looked quite natural. Also, the quite natural h3, trying to defend against the threatening knight g4, was not possible because the knight on g3 is vulnerable. The pawn on f2 is pinned, so after queen takes g3, it's just simply a piece up for black. So those are just a few lines to indicate that the situation had already become tricky for Ramirez and why he had to go into a very long think. And fortunately for him, like mentioned, he came up with the best move, knight e4. Okay, now white wants to exchange one of those two attacking pieces, right? Either the bishop on c5 or the knight on f6. So really the only way to keep the attack going is to play a counter attack, and Lenderman played here knight g4, simply threatening a mate in 2 with queen h2 check, king f1 and queen h1 checkmate. Now the only thing really you can do to stop that is g3, so that was not a difficult move for Ramirez. But now Lenderman played another excellent move. Obviously white wants to take now the bishop on c5, so Lenderman simply retreated the bishop and also prepares to sometimes create a battery with queen b6 against f2. And with this move he's posing the question to white, what are you going to do? Maybe my next move is also going to be h5, h4, right? Trying to pry open the h-file, even though I still have to be careful because you're also hitting the knight on g4. But still the pressure is on white. So again, Ramirez went into a long think, and I guess he must have tried to figure out, so what happens if I play h3 and try to kick the knight now? Well, then black has another very forcing and interesting continuation at his disposal now that the g3 square has been weakened. The h2 pawn is no longer obviously protecting that square, so there would follow bishop takes f2 check, knight f2, it's all very forced, and now again it's mate after queen takes g3 check. The most funny mate is king f1 and knight h2. So again, there were some tricks and mines that Ramirez had to sidestep, and he came up with quite a decent move here. After bishop a7, he played bishop f4. Okay, now, although this move is not losing in itself, on f4 the bishop gets into a bit of a predicament, and Lenderman was very quick to seize the tempo with e5. Not only does that attack this bishop, but it also protects the knight on g4, thereby enabling the move h5, h4, because now obviously the queen could not take the knight on g4, it is protected from the bishop on c8. And Ramirez now had to move his bishop again, it's under attack on f4, and he moved it to g5. And I think in a higher sense this must be considered to be the losing move. White gives black the opportunity to win another tempo against the bishop a little later on. I think in this situation, after e5, it was imperative to try and exchange off one of the attackers with bishop e3, even though it does not look very pretty, because obviously after knight takes e3 and f takes e3, white is in a strategically dubious position, and it's very understandable that he didn't want to play this. But it would mean that white managed to exchange off one of the attackers, the very strong knight on g4. So I think this would have been a better option for him. Obviously, black can continue his initiative with such moves as bishop g4 and so on, but at least he's quite safe now on the dark squares. As mentioned, after e5, Ramirez played bishop g5, not really trying to blunt the activity of the bishop on a7 and suggesting a trade there. So, that's not what he did. And another opportunity, by the way, for him, I guess we mentioned that, if he had retreated to d2, it would also not have been very good, because it also doesn't challenge any of the black attackers, and after h4, introducing the rook on h8, black's attack becomes very, very strong. Okay, so back to the move that was played in the game, bishop g5, and Lenderman played the very obvious bishop f5 and introduces yet another attacker with tempo. The bishop is attacking the knight, and the knight is the defender of the f2 square, right? So that's where the tempo gain comes in. Now, White had to defend against this threat, so he had to play the rather passive rook f1, which does protect the f2 pawn. But here comes another tempo, f6, attacking the bishop. Okay, so now in this particular situation, Ramirez played bishop d2, and I think that after this move there is no doubt as to the result of this game. Note also that the knight on e4 has currently no squares to go to. So in that sense, this tempo was also very important, because it takes away this square from the knight. So were there any better retreats then, or possibilities for White to play after f6? Well, obviously bishop e3 was no longer possible, because after knight takes e3 and f takes e3, the knight on e4 is hanging, and black would just be simply up a piece, right? But I think that necessary was to play h3, because in chess, when defending, there are some important principles to keep in mind. The first one is try to trade attackers. And the second one is try standing your ground. That is to say, try counter-attacking instead of getting bullied around, which only loses time and gives your opponent the opportunity to bring in his pieces with gain of time. So in this case, the bishop on g5 does not contribute anything to the defense. It's merely getting bullied around. Therefore, it made much more sense to counter-attack and suggest the trade of this bishop for the dangerous knight on g4. And that's exactly what the move h2, h3 does. Now, if black now obliges with f takes g5, then after the recapture, and bishop takes g4, for instance, queen d3, rook d8, bishop d5, black does maintain a dangerous initiative, but I don't think it's yet a winning one. Most importantly, White has somehow managed to stabilize his situation on the light squares and can hope to find some peace and quiet over there. Now there is another important line here after the counter-attacking h3. Again, if black would oblige with f takes g5 and after the recapture of the piece try to open up the h file with h takes g4 instead of bishop takes g4, then again bishop d5 and black is not going to make use of his open h file anytime soon. Also note his pawn structure now. He has a triple pawn on the g file, and the isolated pawn on e5 is also not making a great impression. Obviously White is consolidating again on the light squares. He can try to support his bishop in the center with c3, c4, move up his king, and maybe even contest the h-file himself with rook f1 to h1, for instance, right? So even though black may still have some pull. I don't think that white is in any serious danger here anymore. So yeah, I think here we see those important principles in play. Try trading attackers and try standing your ground. That is to say, try counter-attacking instead of being bullied around. And this poor bishop that went to f4 and then went to g5 and then in the game here went to d2. Yeah, I think this really was the beginning of the end for Ramirez in this position. So here came Lenderman's last attacker. He played here rook d8. And with this move he brings in, again with gain and tempo, the last inactive piece. Because white's queen on e2 is, well, it's, what's the English word? It's overextended, right? It has too many functions to perform. It's the defender of the knight on e4, but also the defender of the bishop on d2. And I've not even pointed out here that it is also the defender of the bishop on c4. So in this case, black simply tries to take the knight on e4, and after queen takes e4, threatens to win the bishop on d2. So that poor bishop is also not finding a very happy home on d2. So Ramirez played rook 81 to protect that bishop, but now queen c6 hits the unfortunate knight. So please note again how useful the time-gaining move f7, f6 was, taking away g5 from this knight. Isn't that funny? This knight simply has no safe or legal squares to go to. So this really spells the end for white. So bishop e3 was played. White counterattacks after all, but black now has a winning sequence, and he started with rook takes d1, queen takes d1, knight takes a piece on e3, in between check, black defends by interposing his queen, we exchange queens, black is still a piece up, but here comes another in-between move, knight d6, king d7, white still has to regain his material here, his piece. Now he could have tried to do that with knight takes f5, but obviously then the attacked knight on e3 saves itself by recapturing that knight. So the better move, the one that Ramirez played in the game, was f takes e3. And here comes the final point. The bishop that is attacked on f5 first attacks the rook on f1, and now this rook and also the knight on d6 are hanging. Now it would seem that maybe white can solve these both problems with rook d1, but unfortunately after bishop takes e3 check, king h1, bishop g4, again attacking that rook, knight f5 check, bishop takes d1, knight takes e3, and bishop f3 check. White is simply down too much material, and this would be quite a simple and technical win for black. So after bishop h3 he did not play rook d1, but rather he played knight f5. But after bishop takes f1 and king takes f1, the result of the game was never in doubt. And even though Lenderman experienced some remaining technical difficulties, Ramirez resigned on move 63. I must say I found this a fantastic display of preparation and attacking skill by Lenderman. So, great stuff there from the current tournament leader. Let's move on to fragment number 3. Again, we see Lenderman in this game. He plays the white pieces here against Ray Robson. It's from the 4th round. And it's white to move here. He is up material, but he's also in a bit of a predicament because both his knight on e5 and his bishop on f7 are under attack. He had probably already seen the following very nice solution though. So again, Lenderman in the main role here, he starts with knight takes g6 check. there are two ways to recapture. Possible was bishop takes g6, but then after bishop takes g6, rook takes f4, g takes f4, h takes g6 and rook c2, white has superb winning chances in this endgame. He is up 2 pawns, and also the combination of rook against 2 rather, let's say, loose minor pieces is normally very good, in this case for the white, the first player. So after knight takes g6 check, Robson didn't play bishop takes g6, but he played h takes g6. And now here comes the first point of the combination. Rook h4 check, and black now has to wriggle his way out of this check. And there's really one thing he can do. He can only put his bishop on a vulnerable square. Bishop h6. Now, for the moment he's fine, because rook takes h6 check, question mark, king g7, and because of this double attack black is fine. But that was not Lenderman's intention. After bishop h6, he first played the very strong rook c7. And now the second point is revealed. Now black's king has trouble stepping up into the line of fire on the 7th rank. So if he had done it anyway to protect his bishop, there would be this discovered check with bishop d5 check, and after, let's say, king f6, rook takes h6, white has quite simple winning position here. So after rook c7, Robson tried something else. He played here g5. It's attacking and counter-attacking all over the place, and he now forced white into moving his rook into taking the bishop on h6, which is what Lenderman did. Now let's note that bishop h7 in between doesn't make any sense after bishop g6. So after rook takes h6 check, black played king g7, and he's now hitting the rook on h6, but also the bishop on f7, right? But I think here comes the final and probably most deep point of the whole combination. Lenderman again now counter-attacks with g4. So you could say, for the moment I'm attacking this guy and I'm also attacking this guy, and I'm not going to allow you to take this guy. So I'll just first move away, and then again I still have the double attack on rook and bishop, right? But here white would simply save himself with yet another Zwischenzug. He would play rook g6 check, save his rook, force the king back, and now he has a simple winning position. So unfortunately after g4 it was not possible to first save the f5 bishop. So he played king takes h6, but then after g takes f5, white has come out of the complications with 2 pawns to the good. Superb calculation here by Lenderman, and he went on to win this game without too much difficulty. Great, let's go on to the next fragment. This is the 4th fragment that I want to show you. Aha, yes, this is quite a well-known position, or tabia as we could say, that we have seen before, if my memory serves me correctly, in the World Championship matches between Anand and Kramnik, and also between Kramnik and Topalov. And in this position, Onischuk, with the white pieces from the 4th round against Samuel Shankland, played knight g5, offering to go into some trades here. Well, Shankland obliged. He played bishop takes g5. Queen g5 was forced, of course. The queens came off the board. And now Shankland probably didn't realize that he was in a bit of a predicament and that he really needs to play very carefully. He decided now to lose, quote-unquote, a tempo with bishop g6. But Onischuk made use of that in a very beautiful way by counter-attacking and not obliging into the trade of the light square bishop with bishop f5. Now this bishop f5 hits the knight on d7, which is unprotected. So maybe for that particular reason here, after bishop takes d5, bishop g6 was not the best move. And Shankland could have considered knight b8 to just step out already of that possible attack, and maybe also preparing to bring the knight to a very decent square from where it hits this weakness, but from where it also blocks the c-file against an incursion of the white rooks. So probably knight b8 was the best move to play here. But as mentioned, I don't think that he really sensed what was going to happen. And in this respect, Onischuk had looked into the position much more deeply than Shankland. So bishop g6 was played. Here came the attack on the knight. And now, again, probably knight b8 would have been the best move. But here, Shankland put himself on the back foot with the counterattack h6, but now he is really, let's say, trailing, trailing. Everything is coming after the fact now in the black camp. So Onischuk now took the piece, Shankland had to recapture the piece, and here comes the first white rook, ready to invade on c7 and take up a very dominating position there on the 7th rank. So Shankland started looking for some counterplay with bishop d3, also trying to reroute that bishop maybe to a6, from where it protects some of the pawns. Of course, if he would move it to a6 immediately, he would probably be in trouble after b4, b5. So we see that after rook c7, he first plays a5, and now, for instance, after rook takes c7, he could try maybe bishop a6, but here comes the actual point of, let's say, Onischuk's trading combination. The other rook comes in with what we call a rover, a rook up and over. Very beautiful. Rook a3, hitting the bishop on d3, and after bishop a6, the whole idea was to put this rook on g3. Now, isn't that beautiful? We can see here how quickly all these things can happen. And this pawn on g5 is simply lost, because if you play f7, f6, then the white bishop will take on e6 with check and continue the attack from there. So Shankland tried rook a b8, protecting the pawn on b7, maybe trying to free up his bishop again a little bit, but after rook takes g5, it was very clear that Onischuk was in the driving seat. Shankland tried to exchange off some of the pawns. I mean, if you're in the worst position or if you're down material, you should trade pawns. If you're up material, you should trade pieces, well-known rules. So here came the trade on b5, but here was the second surprise, or maybe already the third surprise. Bishop takes e6, and this really seals the deal. Onischuk now had a really very serious advantage, and he managed to cast it home without too many difficulties. So the final point to note here, and I invite you to use your mind's eye, is that this bishop cannot be taken, because after f takes e6, do you see what white plays? You may want to pause the video. Obviously, after f takes e6, it's rook g5 takes g7 check, king h8, rook h7 check, king back to g8, and then the final move is rook c7 to g7 check mate. A very nice mating pattern there to etch in your mind. Okay, so I also thought that was a very impressive game fragment. So we've seen 4 game fragments. Let's move on to the women's section. So what's the first fragment we see here? Aha, yeah, this is from the first round game between Katerina Nemkova with white, playing against 5-time women's champion Irina Krush. Krush is also currently leading the tournament together with Anna Totonsky at the halfway mark, and we will see a very fierce battle between the two. They will meet for their own individual encounter in the 8th round. But first, let's take a look at this game fragment. It's white to move, and probably the safest move here was to go king b1. But Nemkova played here knight c3. And now I always teach my students that if attack and defense are in balance, that is to say, in this case the knight is attacked 2 times and also protected 2 times, this knight, or this piece, or this pawn, or this square is still vulnerable. So if attack and defense are still in the balance, it still means that whatever it is, the piece or the square, is an attacking target. So what can you do with stuff that you attack? Well, first of all, you can try to attack it again, but there's also another method. You can also try and remove some of the defenders, right? And that's exactly what Irina Krush did here. She had a very nice move at her disposal, and she played a5. Now obviously this move attacks the bishop, which in turn is a defender of the knight on c3. Now had this bishop retreated to a3, then knight takes c3, b takes c3, and a4 would have been very strong for black. So Nemkova did not oblige and tried to counterattack, which normally is a very good strategy. Try to stand your ground as long as possible, because you don't really want to retreat the pieces that you put so nicely on decent squares in the first place. So what she did was knight d5 to b5, excuse me, knight d4 to b5, hitting in turn the queen. And here Irina Krush played another very well thought out move. She played here queen b8, and this is definitely the best square for the queen. Had she gone to b6 instead, it would seem to achieve the same result, but it does not after bishop a3. The bishop was still under attack. And now knight c3, and bishop a6, which is supposed to be the point of the whole combination, right? To win the exchange. But here comes the counter-attacking queen f2, and it turns out that black cannot win the exchange in this particular situation. So therefore the queen had to go to b8 instead of b6, from where she can be counter-attacked. So after knight takes b5, Krush went to b8, very well played. And now, yeah, Nemkova had to retreat the bishop, you're right. You don't want this bishop to be captured on b4 for just not even a lousy pawn. Bishop a3, and here came the final few moves. Knight takes c3, knight takes c3, and bishop a6, winning the exchange. I think we should note here that, well, obviously bishop a6 wins the exchange, and a4 here is not so good since there is a knight on c3 in the other line. The knight was on d4, and here b takes a4 is not so clear because white wins this pawn. But okay, this is all not so relevant, because after knight takes c3, bishop a6 simply won black the exchange. Although she experienced some technical difficulties, also in this case Krush went on to win this game in the long run. So very instructive fragment there about attacking and defense and eliminating the defender. We go to fragment number 6, if I'm counting correctly. Oh yeah, this was also a fantastic game. It was played in the first round between Victoria Ni with the white pieces and the young Ashrita Iswaran with the black pieces. She's only 13 years old and clearly elo-wise, that is to say, the weakest player in the field, but she is fighting very well, and after 3 rounds she actually had scored 2 wins already. And this was the first win. So in this situation there is a very interesting material imbalance. Obviously black, the young Ashrita, has bishop and 4 pawns against rook and 2 pawns. So mathematically this is equal, but these two are very strong connected pass pawns, and also the bishop, when sitting in the center, can normally fight against a rook with good chances. For the moment, however, these two connected passed pawns on the king side are safely blockaded by white's king. So how to make progress here? Well, black was to move, and young Ashrita Eswaran found a very interesting move, making use of a very nice mating motif. Now, before we take a look at this move, I would like to point out that if she wanted to try and mate the white king in one go by playing bishop c4, threatening bishop f1 mate, then there would be the very nasty and disturbing in-between check on a5. This rook is able to harass black's king over the 5th rank. And after bishop d5, play could continue b7, a1 queens, rook takes a1, bishop takes, and this position is most likely just simply a draw. So to sidestep that disturbing check on the 5th rank in this line, in the beginning position, Ashrita played here e5. So this pawn is now sitting on e5, and we can see that this pawn is blocking the 5th rank. So what she wants to do now is again set up for bishop c4 and bishop f1 checkmate. So Victoria Ni took the pawn. Now the 5th rank is safely blockaded, and here came the aforementioned bishop c4. Okay, if white now tries to be smart and snatch this pawn, then bishop takes a2, b7, bishop e6 forces white's king to the long diagonal, and after bishop d5 she can pick up the pawn and win the game. So after bishop c4, Victoria Ni did not play rook takes a2, but rather she defended against the mate in another way with king g2. But here came Eswaran's king, king g4, threatening to support the connected passed pawns and just simply blow white's king off the board. So in time trouble, in mutual time trouble, I think I should say, Victoria Ni played b5, and Jung Eswaran made now an understandable mistake in time pressure. She played bishop d5 check. Now black still has the advantage after this move, but with correct play it is now most likely a draw. Right at this moment, however, she had a forcing win at her disposal. Why not play h3 check, right? That's what this was all about. Bring your king up, support the connected passed pawns. Now Victoria would have should have gone to the 1st rank, but after h2 check and king g2, it all becomes clear that now bishop d5 check and king f1 leads to the simple promotion of the h-pawn, and obviously after h1 queen, black is just simply winning. So that was an unfortunate moment for Ashrita to miss this win, but after bishop d5 check, the game continued as follows. King f1 was played, she took that pesky pawn, but now white starts harassing the black king again with rook a4 check. The king came up, and here she decided to also take that very dangerous a pawn, and Ashrita now played h3. This, of course, is still looking very menacing, but white is just in time to defend against the threat of h3, h2 with king g1. And now as soon as that h-pawn comes forward, white is more than ready to sacrifice her rook against both connected passed pawns, and obviously that would be a draw, as in this situation. White would sacrifice the pawns, and black does not have enough material left to win this position. So after king g1, which was still a very sturdy defense, Ashrita continued with bishop b5. She hit the rook, and she just tries to bring that bishop a little bit closer to interfere over the 2nd rank with the defense that white has set up so nicely. So the rook is threatened, the rook went to d2, And now Ashrita went to c4, threatening to block the second rank and come again with h3, h2. And here Victoria blundered. She played rook c2, and now it is lost again. It was absolutely imperative to start distracting black with the own free pawn, e6, because now the blocking idea with bishop e2 doesn't work, because after e7 it's white who is going to promote the pawn. Play could continue with h2, king h1, and obviously g2 doesn't work now. Black now has to stop the promotion of that pawn. Obviously after rook d8 there's nothing more that black can do, and white is winning actually in this position. So after e6, young Ashrita should have taken that pawn, but now after rook d3 and the continuous harassment of that king, it is not so clear to me how black can still win this position. Actually, I don't see how she can win this position, because you just keep harassing that king, and as soon as that king comes forward and tries to harass the rook goes to the h file, and then again she can always, or he can always, sacrifice itself for this nasty h pawn as soon as it reaches h2. So this would have been a draw after e6, pushing her own free pawn. But as mentioned, after bishop c4, Victoria played rook c2. And here came the blocking idea. Bishop e2. Now black is winning again. The threat is to play h2 check, forcing the white king in the corner, then play king f2 and deliver the final blow with g3, g2 check to g1, queening. So the final few moves were rook c3 check, king g4, e6, h2 check, king g2, and now a very nice deflection, bishop f1 check, forcing the king into the corner, and after king h3, Victoria Knee was forced to resign her game. A scintillating finish to a long and very interesting game, and young Ashrita certainly stole the show with this one. Okay, let's go on to our final few fragments. The one but last one that I have in store for you is from the women's section, the third round. Again, Ashrita Eswaran plays a role in this one. She's playing the white pieces against Kamila Baginskaite, who was once, I think, world champion for the girls under 20 or something. And a formidable opponent, even though she's not having a very happy tournament this year. So in this position it was white, Eswaran to move, and we see a race of pawns. Here she goes, she tries to get a second queen, but e3 discovered check against the king, so she had to move up her king, and now Kamila is also preparing to get another queen. So here we have the rather, what's the word, strange situation? No, situation that does not happen all too often. Seldom situation of 4 queens, and normally the side that gets in the first check has great winning chances, but in this particular situation black's queens, most notably the one on d5, are very well centralized, and she can stave off the direct attack. So young Ashrita started here with queen b2 check, king d3 was played, and now queen h7 was played. That was basically the only other check that she could find to continue. But here comes the nice centralizing queen d to e4, and in this position white really had to play queen takes e4, after which black could blunder with queen takes e4, because queen b1 picks up one of the black pawns and exchanges off into a winning pawn endgame. So after queen takes e4, not queen takes e4 but king takes e4, and here the position is more or less equal, I think. So that's what white should have played in this position, queen takes e4 check. But instead she played queen b3 check, which, yeah, I guess is more attractive, right? You don't want to exchange queens. No, you want to keep both of your strong queens on the board and hope that you can simply mate your opponent. But there was something that both players either hadn't seen or had miscalculated or had misevaluated. Here, Black has the very strong queen c3 at her disposal, which also blocks against the check from the other queen, but also prepares to move the king to in turn check the white king on g3. Now, maybe Camilla didn't like this because she was afraid of maybe this counter check, because the queen on e4 cannot take that queen because it is pinned, but actually this would be a losing move after king e2 discovered check, king h2, and now queen takes h7 check, and it is mate in 2 more moves. How about that? So after queen b3, Black could have gotten the upper hand here with queen c3, when queen d5, for instance, would have been a blunder, as we have just seen. However, Camilla, after this check, did not play queen c3, but she played the losing move, king d4. Now, young Ashrita had a 3-move mate at her disposal here, and it could have started like this: queen a7 check, the only legal move is king f5, queen g7, the only legal move is king f5, and then queen b to f7 is actually checkmate. She played something else, however, which was also perfectly fine, because it simply trades off into a winning pawn endgame. She played here, instead of the mate, queen takes e4. Now again, there's a similar blunder that Black could make here with queen takes e4, queen e6, losing the queen. So after queen e4, Camilla had to play queen takes e4, but after queen takes b4, picking up one of the black pawns, she had to resign because of king e5, exchanging the queens, and again going into a winning pawn endgame for white. So again, Ashrita managed to win a game, and Camilla was again on the rather unfortunate and receiving end of this game. Yeah, so that was a very funny fragment. So let's go to our final fragment of this video, and we're approaching the hour I see on my clock. Let's load the next game. I think this is the last fragment I want to show you, and it's from the 4th round from the women's section. Is Irina Krush playing with the white pieces again against Camilla Baginskaite with the black pieces. If we take a look at the position, we can see that white has a number of active pieces in very nice positions. Yeah, if we compare that with, let's say, for instance, the pieces, we can see that white is quite happy. So these pieces are hovering or somehow pointing into the direction of the black king, but obviously there is no final blow yet at her disposal. So what she needs to do is bring in yet another attacker, and normally for an attack to be successful you have to bring in the queen. And there were a number of candidate moves here. I also explained this position from another point of view in my latest Better Your Chess lesson, number 27, when I talk about thinking algorithms. But I'm pretty sure that Irina immediately zoomed in on the move that she played, queen h5, started calculating this and calculating it all the way to finish. So that's the fragment I want to show you here. Obviously she played her queen h5, which has a very nice mating thread. It starts with queen h7 check, when king f8 is forced, queen h8 check, when knight g8 interposes, is forced, and then with the help of the rook on d7, the queen can deliver mate on g7. So against this mating thread, black can do a number of things. Let's take a look at some simple defenses. Obviously she can try and take the knight, which is the supporter of the attack on the h7 square, but then after queen takes g5 there's a threat of mate on g7, and after g6, queen f6, it becomes apparent that doesn't really help black. So let's take a look at another defense, h6 for instance. Then there would have followed queen f7 check, king h8, and now the very nice bishop f6, the demolition sacrifice, which also brings in yet another attacker. And obviously here rook g8 is answered with queen h5, which threatens, do you see it? You may want to pause the video. It threatens queen h6 checkmate, making use of the pin. The pawn on g7 cannot move. So knight f5 could defend the pawn on h6, but then after this check, and this check, and this double check, it would also be made. Remains after bishop takes f6 also the more direct defense of knight f5, but obviously after bishop g7 check, knight g7, queen takes g7, that's also made. So in the game, after queen h5, Kamila Bangiskaite played queen takes d7. That's also a defense, right? Because remember, at the end of this line we saw that the queen was able to deliver checkmate on g7 thanks to the presence of the rook on d7. Well, now this rook is no longer there, but here comes another problem. Queen f7 check, king h8, and again bishop takes f6, threatening mate on g7. So there are basically three defenses. There's rook g8, there is pawn takes bishop, and there is knight f5. Let's take a look at knight f5. That would lose the queen to queen takes d7. Let's take a look at pawn takes bishop. Obviously that would lead to queen takes h7 checkmate. And now let's take a look at the move that I think was played in the game, rook g8. Because I don't really remember when she resigned. Maybe she resigned here after. Do you see it? We've seen this move before already. The switch with queen h5. Now this threatens two mates. The simple mate on h7 with the queen, but also the nice suffocation mate or smothered mate with knight f7 check. Obviously that would happen after queen f5. Now knight f7 is checkmate, and if you try to protect yourself from the mate against h7 with h6, then white can again make use of the pin and play queen takes h6 check. So one or two moves before this position came on the board, Bangiskaite resigned, and Irina played a very nice game there. Okay, well, great. With that, we have come to the end of yet another chess news video. I hope you've enjoyed this one, learned something from it. I'm expecting to come back with a, let's say, a part 2 with game fragments on the US Chess Championships. Like I said, we're halfway the mark, so there's another week to go. I will intensely follow the tournament, and we'll probably show you some more interesting fragments in a week or so. So this is Waldemar, your chess teacher. Thanks for your attention. Hope to see you again soon. Bye bye.